There we go, I got it. I didn't push it enough last time. So today we're continuing our look at Psalms, and Psalm 40 today. It's not as long as some that we've had, and we may not get through all of it, but I think there's some really marvelous truths that we might learn from looking at it. So if you have your copy, begin reading verse 1 of Psalm 40. For the music director by David, a psalm. I relied completely on the Lord, and he turned toward me and heard my cry for help. He lifted me up out of the watery pit, out of the slimy mud. He placed my feet on a rock and gave me secure footing. He gave me reason to sing a new song praising our God. May many see what God has done so that they might swear allegiance to him and trust in the Lord. How blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord and does not seek help from the proud or from liars. O Lord my God, you have accomplished many things. You have done amazing things and carried out your purposes for us. No one can thwart you. I want to declare them and talk about them, but they are too numerous to recount. Receiving sacrifices and offerings are not your primary concern. You make that quite clear to me. You do not ask for burnt sacrifices and sin offerings. Then I say, look, I come. What is written in the scroll pertains to me. I want to do what pleases you, my God. Your law dominates my thoughts. I have told the great assembly about your justice. Look, I spare no words. O Lord, you know this is true. I have not failed to tell about your justice. I spoke about your reliability and deliverances. I have not neglected to tell the great assembly about your loyal love and faithfulness. O Lord, you do not withhold your compassion from me. May your loyal love and faithfulness continually protect me. For innumerable dangers surround me, my sins overtake me, so I am unable to see. They outnumber the hairs of my head, so my strength fails me. Please be willing, O Lord, to rescue me. O Lord, hurry and help me. May those who are trying to snatch away my life be totally embarrassed and ashamed. May those who want to harm me be turned back and ashamed. May those who say to me, aha, aha, be humiliated and disgraced. May all those who seek you be happy and rejoice in you. May those who love to experience your deliverance say continually, may the Lord be praised. I am oppressed and needy. May the Lord pay attention to me. You are my helper and my deliverer. O God, do not delay. Psalm 40 is, as I've said before, nearing the end of the first book of the Psalms, which ends in 41, another Psalm of David. And we learn a number of things that we've seen in many, many cases. As we've seen before, this psalm mirrors and relates to his purposes, knowing that for him, trust in God and deliverance and worship are all kind of bound together in the way he's framed this. And he starts off by trusting and declaring in the first three verses how it's important that he is recognizing that God's timing and his deliverance are sure, even though he himself may not know exactly what he's talking, how he's experiencing these difficulties. And in this first three verses, he talks a lot about waiting patiently for the Lord. And that's always been a challenge for most of us. Patience is something just we don't understand, because God's timing is definitely not my timing or any of us. And it's hard to understand why that seems to be a delay. Although maybe as we look back after the provision has been clarified, or the instruction has been clarified, that we come to understand what God's purposes are, then we might be able to say, now I understand. Now I see why he did what he did, and we can understand how God has done it in his own perfectly timing. And so I think that's what David is really, really talking about. And even in David's mind, even during the difficult times, even though he might not see a deliverance immediately, he recognizes that these times of waiting are important. And he knows that the Lord is hearing our cries, and he will act in his perfect time. So And then eventually we'd lift him up, lift us out of our struggles, and we can be one who can be gloriously praising what God has done. So I think we could probably learn that, this patience and trust in God is really crucial when we face these horrible challenges, and that the Lord will in fact respond to us when the right time comes. And one of the questions I came across is, and we should ask ourselves the same thing, am I really waiting patiently for the Lord? I mean, we might say we are, but in our actions, in our thoughts, in our interaction with those around them, do we express that we are indeed the ones who are waiting? So as we look at how David is talking about being patient, we'd have to ask ourselves, do I really genuinely trust in God's timing? Can I say and believe that his timing is perfect no matter what's happened to me in whatever circumstances? Or is it really kind of the opposite, where I become impatient, and that by being impatient, I recognize that I'm not really cultivating my relationship with God, because I haven't put myself in a position that, yes, I'm willing to wait, even in those difficult times that David is expressing. So I think we might consider that, and that's the way David focuses upon what he's saying there. And then he talks about in verse 3, which I thought is interesting. He talks about this new song. We've seen new songs before. Remember, when we looked at Revelation, there's a time when the believers will be singing a new song that no one can learn. Now, I don't know if that's what David is talking about. And I've always wondered, what's so important about a new song? Songs, and all through Psalms, we probably firmly believe that many, if not most of the Psalms, were sung. We don't know whether they had a lyric or a tune. The lyrics are in fact the words of the psalm, but how it was done. We've seen many psalms that talked about to be played on a harp or a lyre, as some translations would say, and then David would sometimes give musical instruction. This is a difficult song or skillful song. He uses these Hebrew words that we really don't know too much what they mean. But he talks about this new song, and so that in this new song in David's mind reflects a couple of things. He talks about this renewal, this making new, and that may be the point of a new song, because something that's new, you have to ask, well, why is it new? Is it something you hadn't thought of before? I don't think that's what he's doing. Perhaps it's new in the sense that it's another way that he had not done before or hopes to do, that express a different aspect of his understanding of God's love, what God is doing, what God is showing David, and then by application showing to us. And that may be the newness of this song that he's talking about. So it's possible. And that part of that new song is that it is a public testimony of God's greatness to those around him. So I think if we look at it in a song, if we have a new song, is that it shows a different aspect of our interacting with the experiences in our life in relationship to how God has worked in my situation, good and bad, difficult trials or not. And that as he looks at this, this song shows something that you're living in the present. I can look how God has helped me in the past, and that's a basis for how I worship him, because I've seen God's hand. I've seen how God has done things in my life in the timing that he has, and that by thinking about this new song, it's really saying now. It's not in derision or about what's happened in the past, like saying, what have you done for me lately? I don't think that's what David is trying to say, but he's saying, I recognize that beginning today, I've got this new way of expressing my desire to worship God. And so I think we could probably say that. And by being present, and today, the word I would use is vibrant. It's alive. It's something that it shows an ongoing relationship with God. And so when I think about that, if I'm looking at it, as David will talk about this experience that he has, talking about this deliverance and how that he's expressed it in this way. So I think that's what's going on. It's something brand new in many, many ways. Another part of what I think David is saying in verse 6 through 8 is really talks about how critical, how important is obedience and how it applies to my heartfelt relationship with God. And David says something we've seen before, and we'll see again, Lord willing. He talks about that it is important to recognize that God does not delight in sacrifices. Now, immediately in David's day, when they talk about sacrifice, immediately thought about the temple worship, the animals, the grain, the wave, the heave offerings, all those kind of things. But I don't think that's what he's focusing upon. And sacrifices aren't necessarily things you give up. It sometimes could be something that you assume, something you take on. Lord, I'm going to bring into my life this challenge purposefully. I'm going to go over and talk to my neighbor. I know he's been a bad guy to me, but I'm going to go over to my neighbor and I'm going to do something that would be honoring to you. And that's a mission, if you will, that I'm willing to take on. So it doesn't necessarily mean I'm giving up something, but maybe it's some way that I'm adding something to it. And David kind of contrasts that, and we've seen this all over Scripture, and I've written 3 passages that talk about God's view and man's view of sacrifices. And it's 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22. It says, this is, I forget who said this. It says, does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as he does obedience? Certainly, obedience is better than sacrifice. Paying attention is better than the fat of lambs. And I like that, pay attention. That's Psalm 50. And of course, we saw it in Psalm 51 where David is finally recognizing, acknowledging his sin with Bathsheba and the death of Uriah. And in the middle, near the end of that first Psalm 51, David accurately says the sacrifice God desires is the humble spirit. And O God, a humble and repentant heart you will not reject. And that tells us David recognizes what he's done and how he needs to rectify it. And finally, in Hebrews chapter 13 says, the writer of Hebrews says, and do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for God is pleased with such sacrifices. And that's interesting. Doing good is a sacrifice. And I'm going to have to wrestle with that. How would doing good in that way and sharing what you have, how is that a sacrifice? I'm obviously, I hate to say, losing something, maybe time, maybe effort, maybe emotion, objective things, finances, time. It's hard to say, but those are the things that the writer of Hebrews tells us, that God is pleased with those as sacrifices. So maybe we should spend some time, maybe so much in our culture, being in the New Testament times, we have an understanding of sacrifices. We have an understanding of the Old Testament sacrifices, but that's a different focus. And, doing good, how can that be a sacrifice? I think that might be something to chew on. I may have to spend some more time looking at it. So I think we might recognize that. And the question I came across is that, if I'm looking at it, and am I in fact prioritizing obedience over ritual? And I think, well, wait a minute. Do we have rituals in this church? Things that we've always done this way for whatever the purpose is. I don't know. Oh, you can't do this because you got to do that. And I catch myself thinking, am I doing what I do because of ritual? And that may be something that I want to look at. And I'm not really sure. But I think what we can learn from that is, God really desires obedience, not in action, but from the heart. And the actions will flow from that. The scriptures talk about out of the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. So if you're doing good things in your heart, then good things should naturally flow out from that. And not just these external things, not just giving up something. And sometimes I think when I look at how I go about my daily life, do I do things because it's a ritual? I always pray this, I always do this at this time. And is there a danger in getting caught up in ritual, doing something the same way, the same time, for the same purpose? Some of them may not be the best. And then you think about it, well, maybe, what could that be? Well, is church attendance a ritual? Is giving a ritual? Does that reflect my true obedience to God in my life? So I asked myself this question: how can I ensure that my actions, and I like that, my actions reflect a sincere desire